Welcome back to Zane Customs. This week I'm going to be sculpting this custom D&D character. So for those of you who haven't watched my previous video, basically I'm doing a series of videos for the next couple weeks here where I'm going through and re-sculpting my very first ever digital sculpts and also their custom D&D figures. So basically the first one was this god character who is just this overly muscly dude who has a lion on top of a lion head on top of his head, kind of wearing it like a crown or a helmet type thing. So all I did when I got to sculpting this character was take that original lion head and then turn it into basically what you see here. And again, this being a resculpt, I don't have any original video of me sculpting this character, but basically what you see here is where I was at. There's a lot of problems with it, you know. Obviously he doesn't have legs. I already cut off the bottom of this statue, so you can't see anymore, but his hand was way too small for the rest of his body. I upscaled his left hand and I gotta add in a right hand, and I was actually really happy with the sculpt at the time because the muscles looked a lot better in my opinion than my previous one, and I did a lion face and I was really happy with it. But looking back, there's a lot of problems with it. Like, I don't even have fur. There's no fur going on. Even the hair is pretty simplistic. So throughout this video, I'm basically just gonna be upgrading him, making a full body for him, adding a lot of small details, and really just fleshing out the whole sculpt. So to jump back in time a little bit, I started this D&D campaign probably like 3 or 4 years ago. It's been a long time, and I initially did this drawing just because I like drawing, so I thought it'd be cool to draw out everybody's D&D character. So as you'll see throughout these videos, I actually have initial drawings and designs for every character, but after getting to that point, I decided it would be really cool to sculpt them and 3D print them. And at that time, I had not a very great plastic 3D printer. So even though the sculpts were decent, printing them out, they didn't look great, and I had a lot of issues with it. But after a few years of that, I ended up getting a really high quality resin printer that does really great detail, makes the characters, or it really does justice to the sculpt you have in the computer. But anyways, the whole point of sculpting these characters was for this D&D campaign, and you know, because I had that 3D printer, I thought it'd be cool because I could actually print them out and give them to the players, and I thought it would just be cool. So that's kind of how this whole thing started. And I've mentioned this in a lot of my videos, but I oftentimes will start a sculpt off in an iPad app called Forger, and then once I get it so far, I'll put it over into ZBrush to finish it off. Back when I was doing these sculpts, I didn't have anything other than Forger. You know, ZBrush is a much more expensive program, and I had to have a really nice computer that could actually run it. So I just did everything in Forger, and that's why, like, a lot of these things, like right here, I'm adding a bunch of braids into his hair, and it's not in the initial drawing I did all those years ago, but it's been a long time, so I've had a lot longer to think about this character and a lot of different aspects I wanted to add to him, character-wise and design-wise. So now that I have ZBrush, and I'm not really limited as far as power and all that like I would be with the Forger app, I'm decided to go ahead and add all these things, and you'll see throughout the video I add a lot of things. I'm adding all these braids to his hair, but I'm also actually finally giving him legs and a bunch of things that really can finally kind of do justice to the character after all this time. So basically at this point, I'm just going in and cleaning things up. I've really been getting a lot more into coloring with my sculpts. I've looked at a lot of other programs that do better job coloring than ZBrush's native coloring system, and a lot of those cost money, so can't really get into it. So I've just been trying to do the best I can with ZBrush, and I'm sure I can do even better. Just the more I learn, I feel like the better I get. But basically all I'm doing at this point is fixing up the base sculpt, and then I'm going to start adding things in, like his eyes are separate spheres now, just because it's hard to sculpt the sphere perfectly, especially when you're already inside of another mesh with a lot of polygons. So it's easier for me to just bring in a separate eye, and then I could color it and I'll do all that stuff separately. And then also I'm going over his whole body and trying to add fur. So like if you see like under his eyes and over most of his face, I just add in these lines just to give the impression of fur. But in certain areas I want it to look thicker, so like at the bottom of his chin and kind of around his lips, I'm trying to make it look more like tufts of fur, and I'll do that all over his body and at the joints and stuff. But that was one thing I was really excited about being in ZBrush. I could add all these extra details, the braids, all that stuff, but I could actually like add fur, whereas Forger, you're limited basically by the power of your iPad, so you can only add so much detail to a sculpt before it'll literally just tell you, you know, not enough power to keep subdividing or whatever, you know. And also a little bit of backstory on this character. This character, unlike last week's character, is actually a character for one of the players, where last week he was an NPC. This is my brother's character. His name's Ula, and his whole thing is he's traveling the world looking for basically his mortal enemy, and he's gonna kill him. And his mortal enemy dropped the sword when they were last in battle, so now Ula is just dragging the sword around the world, and he's basically vowed to himself that he's gonna kill his mortal enemy with this sword. So I thought it'd be really cool to, you know, add that aspect into the sculpt. So came up with the idea of having the sword stuck into the ground, because basically my brother's idea for the sword was just like a giant cleaver type blade, and just like massive, like literally he has to drag it around, and he can lift it, but it's, you know, really struggles with it, and just this massive sword. So thought the idea of having that kind of stabbed in the ground and maybe having Ula climb on top of it would be really cool. And you'll see later in the video when I add in his legs and stuff, that's kind of where I went with it. And you'll see I'll go back and forth between color or just one flat color, because it's harder to see fine details when you have a lot of color, especially if it's not just one solid color, because it kind of it helps break up the mesh. But it's easier to just go into one base color for doing fine details, or if you just want to make sure everything looks right, especially because everything I sculpt on here is going to be available on my Etsy shop to buy. So I don't want something to look really good in the computer when it's fully painted, but if I print it out, a lot of those details are missed because they were just painted details, you know. So that's why you'll see me a lot. I'll go back and forth between full color to just like one solid color, because it's a lot easier to tell details. And this is what I'm talking about, where I'm trying to add in a lot more like tufts of fur and like bigger pieces. And ZBrush is an amazing program, and you can do a lot with it. You can actually they have a whole process for doing hair or fur, and it looks like real life hair. People who are good can get really amazing results, and if they're like a really realistic sculptor or artist, you know, they can make really lifelike looking portraits. But that wasn't really what I was going for here. My style's a little bit more realistic. Like obviously his muscles are more realistic. They're not boxy or anything like that, but they're still a suspension of disbelief. With like the size of his muscles is just insane. You know, I kind of lean into that more superhero aesthetic, just a little bit more fantastical. And the same thing with pretty much every part of the sculpt with his fur and everything. Like I want it to look more realistic by actually adding a fur and like texture to it, but I don't need a million individual hairs going across his mane. You know, I think the little spikes coming out is good enough for me to just kind of sell the idea of what this is supposed to be, and it definitely looks a lot better than it did when I did it on my iPad, so I'm happy with it. So adding legs to this character was also a lot more of a challenge than it was with my last week's sculpt, because Namian was basically, he was just standing there when his arms were hanging down by his side. It was just a super simple pose, which is what I was going for. But with this guy, he was in a more dynamic pose, and adding legs to him, with him being hunched over the way he is, I couldn't really add legs in without having his back arched to an insane degree for his legs to actually be under him, or have it so he's like climbing up on top of a rock, you know, having his hand rest on a rock or something. So I was messing around with that, and that's when I came up with the idea of what if he's standing on top of his sword, you know, because then it would make a lot more sense for his legs to be clear under him, but still have his right arm going forward, you know, either grabbing something or resting on something. So that's when I decided to try this idea out with a sword, and I actually love it. I think it looks really cool. Again, you know, it's not a perfect sculpt. There's things I can do. I only have so much time to work on these sculpts. That's why, you know, I try to put out a video every week. So that's why sometimes there's little problems with these sculpts that I'll actually go back and fix later after the video's put out. But I gotta, you know, I have a time limit with pretty much all these videos, so they're not always 100% perfect. But I was actually really happy with the way this one turned out. And one really fun thing that I've wanted to do with this D&D campaign, and will hopefully come into play later on in this YouTube series, is this is the characters, these sculpts, let me say, are the characters day one. Like, right when the campaign starts, right when this dude's doing whatever he's doing, this is what he looks like. So this guy's from, you know, a tribe of lions, and they're not very advanced, you know, so all he's wearing is a loincloth. But my idea is basically, as the campaign progresses, I want to, you know, allow the characters to build up their armor, you know, get armor, get more swords, get whatever they want, magical items, all these things. So I really want to come back to this sculpt, you know, years down the line, or however far down it is when I actually finish this D&D campaign, you know, if I ever do. And like, say at this point, Ula had, you know, gathered some magical armor and maybe got another one of these giant swords, so now he's, you know, dual wielding, whatever it is. I want to come back and not necessarily have the same pose, but like sculpt Ula again, but, you know, like in his final form, I guess, you know. Just kind of thought it would be cool to show throughout the progression of the D&D campaign. I could give these statues to my players to show the progression of their character. And just to jump back into the actual sculpt again, this is one of the benefits of ZBrush. I could never do something like this with Forger. Just because, again, Forger is limited based on the capacity of your iPad. And there are certain ways to kind of cheat the system and trick it. Like the very first video I ever put on this channel is a sculpt I did of Thor fighting a character called Gore, who's actually gonna be the main villain in the next Thor movie, so that's pretty cool. But that sculpt was all done pretty much 100% in Forger. I did some final touches in ZBrush, but at that point I didn't know ZBrush, so I didn't really do much in ZBrush. It was pretty much all done in Forger. And Forger doesn't allow for a scene that big, because there's a base, there's two highly detailed characters, and then there's like lightning and things coming off of Thor's hammer. There's a lot going on, and a lot of it is high detail, and Forger doesn't allow for those things. But you can kind of trick it by exporting certain models and uploading them back into scenes in certain ways, and you can trick Forger to do certain things. And, you know, maybe I'll show that off in a future video. But basically, it's not easy, and even at that, you're still limited. You know, you'll eventually find a hard limit where it just won't let you do anything. So doing something like this, you know, converting my original model into what I have now, like adding legs and doing all these things, I don't think Forger would have been capable of that, especially because I would have to basically add legs in and then merge the two bodies so I could have a smooth transition from torso to legs. And when you do that in Forger, I would instantly lose all the detail from the chest up. And, you know, there's just so many other problems that you run into. That Forger was a great app, and I still love it, and I like starting sculpts off in it because I can just sit around with my family, watch TV, whatever, and I could just be working on my iPad, and I don't have to be in my room working on my computer away from them. So it's nice for that. But as far as like finishing a sculpt, or, you know, if you're gonna go high detail or anything, Forger's not really the way to go. You know, it's not a professional tool like the way ZBrush is. ZBrush is way more professional, has way more aspects to it. That it's basically, it's just a much better program all around. And not to make it sound like Forger sucks. It's just Forger's an app for an iPad, where this is, you know, a professional computer program. So it's makes sense. Obviously, it's going to be better. Anyways, that was just a long-winded rant to say that ZBrush is awesome. Now here's some final progress shots, or completed shots, I guess, of the sculpt. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm super happy with it. But yeah, let me know what you think, if there's anything you think I should add it or anything like that. And let me know if you think there's any sculpts I should work on in the future. Like I said, the next few weeks are going to be focused on these D&D re-sculptings, but then after that I got some Minecraft ones. I know people have been asking for those, and then I got some superhero ones. I got a Wolverine sculpt I'm working on, and I got a lot of other cool stuff in the works. So if you want to see me do anything, let me know in the comments. There's a good chance I'll probably end up doing it. And you know, again, let me know what you think down below. I really appreciate anyone that's willing to like, comment, and subscribe, and or recommend me to a friend or anything like that. I super appreciate it. And you could also check out my Etsy and my Instagram if you're interested. Those are both at Zane Customs. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.